Welcome to the Museum of Horace Mann, where we pride ourselves on our philosophy of teaching as Mann would teach you. Today we have our special Mann Day tour, where you will be able to view our entire museum exhibit online for free. We also want to thank you for taking the time to view our idol's life story. Mann was born a farmer in Lexington, Massachusetts on May 4, 1796. He was mainly a self-educator, though he did get about 10 weeks of professor's education every year. He spent most of his hours in the library, learning all he could from the books. When he was 10, his father died, and a year later, his brother was in a drowning accident and died too. Despite these personal barriers, he still had a passion for learning. Horace Mann went to Brown University as a sophomore. He graduated as a valedictorian in 1819. He took a detour and taught Latin and Greek for a while, but went back to politics. Mann was elected as a Massachusetts legislator in 1827, which was also the time when he was really getting interested in educational reform. He believed that focusing on educational reform would help other reform movements, like fair treatment of the mentally ill and poverty. Horace Mann created the Massachusetts State Board of Education and was also the first secretary of it, too. Part of his job was to help the conditions of the schools. Although Mann knew the conditions would be bad, he didn't realize how awful it would be. He learned this when he went to all of the schools personally to check them out. His astonishment soon turned into the determination to fix it all, and so required annual reports, such as this one, on every school's conditions, teachers, and students' progress. Horace Mann had 6 main fundamentals to education. We will focus on the first 3. The first fundamental was that the public could not remain ignorant of the country's political self anymore. This ensured that the reform would happen. The second fundamental was that education must be controlled, paid for, and sustained by the public. This was supposed to increase the participation and the motivation of the parents. The third fundamental was that schools must invite all children of different racial, religious, and social backgrounds. This fundamental was supposed to also promote the reform for segregation. Now we will focus on the last 3 fundamentals of Horace Mann's educational philosophy. The fourth fundamental was that all education must be moral, yet free of all religious influence. That specifies that he wanted a morally correct, yet religiously restrained teacher. Fundamental 5 was education must be taught by the spirits, methods, and discipline of the free society. This means that Mann wanted education to be taught by the ethics of today's society. Fundamental 6 was classes could only be taught by professionally trained teachers. Mediocre teachers would defeat the purpose of the reform and compromise the future of our society. We are now entering the questions and answers portion of our tour. Does anybody have a question? Yes.
When did Horace Mann die, and what was the cause?
Horace Mann died in the summer of 1859, and the cause was most likely from the stress of his jobs and all of the long hours that he spent for our future, which did pay off. Are there any other questions? Yes, sir.
What was one of his most famous quotes and why?
One of Mann's most famous quotes was, "Be ashamed to die until you've won some victory for humanity." This was probably one of the most famous because he said this to his last class before he died, and he wanted them to be successful. So, to review what we learned today, Horace Mann was a very important part of our educational history because without him we would probably have needed more time and to have a good educational system. He created the first state board of education, was concerned for all of the school's conditions and tried to fix them, and had 6 basic fundamentals about what education was. Thank you again for taking the time to view our online personal tour. This next visual is for a very special viewer out there. Thank you, and please enjoy the show. Welcome to the Museum of Horace Mann, where we pride ourselves on our philosophy of teaching as man would teach you. Today we have our special Man Day tour, where we will be Welcome to the Museum of Horace Mann, where we pride ourselves in teaching as man would teach you. Today we have the special Man Day tour, where you can view our entire Welcome to the Museum of Horace Mann, where we pride ourselves on our philosophy as teaching as man would teach you. Today we have our special Man Day tour, where you will be able to see all of the Mann was born in Lexington, Massachusetts on May 4, 1796. He was born in a farmer's family. He was mainly a self-educator, though he did get about 10 weeks of professor's education every year. He spent most of his hours in the library learning all he could. When he was 10, his father died, and a year later, his brother was drowning in an aqueduct. Can I try that?
Where's your fake
Part
money?
of his job was to help the conditions of the schools. Although Mann knew the conditions would be bad, he didn't realize it would be horrible and awful. He learned this when he went to all of the schools personally to check them out. His astonishment soon turned into the determination to fix it all, and so required annual reports, such as this one, to be on every school's conditions, their teachers, and their students' progress.